Goblin launch detected.
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. If you're looking for cards in the US, look no further as you can use the promo code MTGMuddstah to get you 5% off anything on the site. Or if you're in Canada like me, you can use the same promo code at Multizone to get 10% off your orders of singles. If cards aren't what you're looking for, Original Magic Art has playmats, tokens, and sweet art that you can use that same promo code to help you get 5% off your order there. And if you just want to help out the channel, you can always consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month and join the generic Goblin Gang. Hello and welcome to my channel. If you aren't already a subscriber, you might know me as MTG Muddstah, also known as Andrew, and I post 2 heavily edited and narrated EDH games a week. What you're about to watch is hopefully the first of many modern gameplays that I post on my channel. This is just a rough draft to see how interest is going, but the plan is to basically have people playing games, recording it, and then narrating and editing it down. I'd love to start off games with a visualization of their decks so that people get a sense of what they're playing, but unfortunately I didn't get the deck list this time around. That being said, I'm going to provide some stock lists that I've taken from MTG Goldfish to at least give you a sense of what each deck has and does. First up, we have Hammertime with Archa. This deck is a combat-focused one, focusing heavily on the card that the deck is named after, and that's Colossus Hammer. His opponent today is Phil, playing 5-color Domain, which uses a lot of triomes to help be able to power out domain-based spells. Archa is playing Hammertime, whereas we have Phil playing 5-color Domain. Archa wins the die roll, and they both keep their opening 7. Archa plays Plains, and casts Giver of Ruins. Phil plays a tapped Indatha Triome. Archa plays a Plains, and then taps both of his lands to cast Pure Steel Paladin. Phil has a Wooded Foothills, which he plays and cracks, losing 1 to go and find a Steam Vents. He shocks himself to have it come in untapped, and then taps a red and a green, casting Territorial Kavu and passing. Archa drops an Ornithopter after drawing for turn, and plays a Silent Clearing. He loses 1 to tap the Clearing, casting an Esper Sentinel. He taps a Plains to cast Steelshaper's Gift, and goes to find a Colossus Hammer to put to hand. Once he's done shuffling, and Phil cuts his deck, he uses that last Plains to cast the Hammer. He draws a card from the Pure Steel Paladin, and with the Hammer out, now has Metalcraft active. He equips the Hammer for 0 onto the Paladin, and goes to combat. He swings at Phil, and Phil chumps with a Kavu, and Archa passes once combat is done. Phil plays another Wooded Foothills, and cracks it, losing 1 to find a forest. He then taps 3 mana for a Shardless Agent, and cascades before the creature resolves. This has Phil revealing until he hits the only spell that costs 2 or less in his deck right now, another Territorial Kavu. He casts it, and the Shardless Agent then resolves, and he passes turn. Archa draws, and plays Urza's Saga. He adds a lore counter to the enchantment land as it enters, and then sacrifices the Silent Clearing to draw a card. He then moves the Hammer over onto the Sentinel, and goes to combat. He swings at Phil, who blocks the Shardless Agent. Archa then plays another Esper Sentinel in his post-combat main phase, and passes turn. Phil drops his 3rd Wooded Foothills for the game. He's then able to cast a Scion of Draco for only 2 mana since he has all the basic land types he can have, and when it resolves, the Scion currently has First Strike and Trample because Phil has a red and a green creature. Phil then cracks the Foothills to go and find a mountain, and he then taps 2 once that's done to cast the Fire Side of Fire and Ice, targeting the Giver with the damage. Archa gets a trigger apiece from his Esper Sentinels, but before drawing, responds by tapping the Giver and gives his Pure Steel Paladin protection from red. Archa then draws 2 cards, and the Giver is taken out. Phil then goes to combat with a Kavu, exiling the Giver with a Kavu's on attack trigger, while Archa blocks with a Pure Steel Paladin but still takes some trample damage. Archa draws and adds another lore counter to the Urza's Saga. He then plays a Plains, and then attacks with the Hammered Up Sentinel. Phil blocks the Scion, and after combat, Archa plays out a Springleaf Drum. He then uses the drum to tap the Ornithopter and casts a Sigarda's Aid and passes to Phil. Phil plays a Misty Rainforest for turn and drops another Territorial Kavu. He moves to combat, swinging the Kavu, and exiles the Steel Shaper's Gift. Before leaving the Declare Attacker step, Archa uses Urza's Saga, tapping it to make a Construct token. With the amount of artifacts he has, it's a 6/6, and he blocks the Kavu. With nothing else, Phil passes. Archa draws and puts the final lore counter onto the Saga, and activates it to make another Construct token before sacrificing it. He then goes to find a Shadow Spear to put to field, and Phil knows when he's beat and scoops it up. At this point they move to sideboarding, with Phil knowing he's up against a fairly heavy artifact-centric deck, and he decides to bring in 2 Kataki War's Wage, 2 Force of Vigor, and a Teferi Time Raveler. Meanwhile, Archa cuts 3 Memnites and 4 Esper Sentinels, and brings in 3 Lavinia Azorius Renegades, which is basically anti-Cascade tech, and 4 Blacksmith Skill, which is protection for his permanents. Once they're done shuffling up, Phil's on the play, and both players keep their opening 7. Phil just plays a Wooded Foothills and ships a turn. Archa plays a Marsh Flats and loses 3 to Shaka to Hollowed Fountain. He then casts an Ornithopter, and once that's resolved, brings out Sigarda's Aid. At the end of turn, Phil cracks his Foothills, losing 1 to find an Indatha Triome. Phil draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire, passing. Archa drops an Urza Saga and adds a lore counter to it for his turn. He swings the Ornithopter at Phil, bluffing a hammer to be flashed out, but Phil says no blocks and calls the bluff. Archa then drops a Stoneforge Mystic in his post-combat main phase, and goes to tutor for a hammer to hand. At the end of turn, Phil cracks the Bloodstained Mire, losing 1 to find a Rogrin Triome. Phil draws and shocks out of Steam Vents. He then evokes Fury by exiling Violent Outburst, and takes out both of Archa's creatures. Once he's finished sacrificing the elemental because of Evoke, Phil then casts a Shardless Agent. He cascades until he hits Kataki War's Wage, and not a Kavu this time, and passes to Archa. Archa draws and adds a second lore counter to his saga, and plays Inkmoth Nexus for turn, and passes. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a mistake at this point, as Phil misses his own Kataki War's Wage trigger on his Shardless Agent. He then plays an Indatha Triome, which comes in tapped, and moving to combat, swings both creatures at Archa, who before moving to blocks, makes a Construct token with the Urza Saga, and puts it in front of Kataki. Phil then casts a Violent Outburst before moving to damage, and cascades until he hits another Kataki. Phil has to resolve the legendary rule, and sacrifices the tapped and attacking Kataki. Phil's creatures are then pumped by +1/+0, and Archa then takes 3, and Phil passes. Archa untaps, and on his upkeep has a Think. With the Saga trigger on the stack, Archa taps the Urza Saga to make 1 colorless and animate the Inkmoth Nexus, and then resolves the Saga trigger, putting the 3rd lore counter onto it and sacrificing it to find a 0 or 1 costing artifact. He grabs a Colossus Hammer and puts it to the field. Sigarda's Aid then triggers and lets Archa put it onto his Inkmoth Nexus, which does lose flying. Archa then animates the Inkmoth Nexus again, which has it regain flying, and is able to swing 11 infect damage to win game 2 and win round 1. Game review time. So that was pretty sweet, and I love Archa's Hammertime deck. It's incredibly powerful, and it seems like he just smashes face, which is something I love to do in EDH. I love the interaction between an Inkmoth Nexus and the Colossus Hammer, being able to activate it again to give it back flying, and it's incredible to see how many artifacts he's able to get out with only 1 mana. Now, bear in mind that my track record with Modern typically involves me playing a deck and then it getting banned 5 months later. I started with Storm when the format came out, and Seething Song got banned, which had me quit. I then came back and played Birthing Pod, and well, you know how that goes. 3rd time I came back, I was like, hey, let's play Grixis Splinter Twins, and yep. That being said, there are a ton of new deck archetypes out, and 5-Color Domain was one I certainly wasn't familiar with when I saw Phil sit down and pull us out. It seems like nowadays a lot of decks are built around 1 or 2 main cards from Modern Horizons, and in this case it seemed to be Territorial Kavu, with a little splash of Cascade for good fun. Phil was also running a lot, or at least it seemed like it, a lot of those elementals from Modern Horizon 2, including Endurance, Solitude, and as we saw in the game 2, Fury. These cards seem insanely good, and I'm excited to hopefully build a modern deck of my own to play in the future. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.